Welcome, listeners, to another bonus episode of Oh My Word. Today we're going a little bit of a different direction today because we have with us a special guest who is an English teacher. Oh, so this will be interesting to get her perspective on English, on words and writing and reading. So please, everyone, big round of applause. Please welcome Naomi Grossman. Hooray!
Oh my gosh, thank you.
Yeah, welcome to the program, Naomi. How's it going over there?
Thank you so much. Yeah, it's going great. Thank God everything is actually beautiful here right outside New York City. So that's the weather forecast, right?
Yeah, well, great. And see, another bonus. We got a weather forecast. Excellent. So let's dive in. So Naomi is, as we mentioned, she's an English teacher. She teaches middle grade, so 6th, 7th, and 8th, in a school that has more than one room. So she is part of this century. Naomi, how did you get, why an English teacher? Was that something that you were always gearing toward, or is that something that you kind of fell into?
Well, I actually fell into it accidentally. I was in college and I happened to meet someone who was the CEO of a bunch of different schools out in California. And he said, "Do you ever think about being an English teacher?" And I said, "No." And then he was like, "Well, why don't you just come out and, visit the school?" But I had never been to California before, so I really came out to see what California was like. And then I ended up visiting, and apparently I didn't even know it. I was interviewing with people, and they ended up offering me the job, and I kind of just fell into it and decided that I enjoyed it, and I think I was really good at it. So here we are, 10 years later, and still an English teacher.
Wow, 10 years later. So what were you studying? Were you studying something English related?
Yeah, so I studied literature and classics at university. Because I'm a super dork. And so basically, I always loved reading. I was always reading as a child. And then I never planned on being a teacher. In fact, I didn't really have a particular plan. I sort of just thought that I would do publishing or editing or I don't know, something in that regards because I just love reading. But this ended up working out. And I think I kind of have a different view than most people about the purpose of a college education anyway. I think it's just because you particularly love a subject and you want to study that subject more, not to prepare you for a particular job. But in my case, it ended up preparing me really well for teaching literature and Latin. So happened to work out.
Yeah, that works. So when you're designing your curriculum, I don't know how much of it is required by state and how much space you have to move around.
100%. I do 100% of my own curriculum.
100% your own curriculum? And that's because I guess you're not in a public school that would have
No, I teach at a private school. Public school, you do 0% of your own. It's literally everything is mandated by the state or federal government. So
okay, so having your own choice, I don't know if you could say percentage-wise or some sort of fraction idea-wise, what kind of breakdown, what do you have in your curriculum as far as whatever you're going to be teaching throughout the year?
In terms of subject matter?
Yeah, in terms of subject matter. Yeah.
Okay, so I do literature every Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and I would say literature is probably the subject I focus on the most because I think I hope that of all of the subjects, well, I guess writing too. Writing is equally important with literature because writing is the skill that they're going to need. From writing, I should say, the kids are going to acquire the skills that they're going to need for the future. But from literature, I think that they acquire the morality and the ideas that they're going to need for the future. So I would say I focus 50% on literature, 30% on writing, and I cannot do math. So let me try this again. 50% on literature.
Yeah, you got another 20%, yeah.
And then 25 for writing and grammar. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Because I teach diagramming sentences for grammar, which is so much fun if you're a math, logical person. But if you're not a conceptual person, then it's a little bit challenging.
Yeah. Well, I remember that fun.
Yeah.
So coming into a class, if you say, my students can only learn one thing or remember one thing 5 years from now or 10 years from now, what do you want or if they can only learn to love one thing, I should say, what would you want that to be?
Okay. Well, those are two separate questions. If they could only learn to love one thing, it would be to love the experience of being immersed in a book. Because there are it's so easy to become immersed in a TV show because it's a passive activity, but it doesn't fill you. Like, I'm not saying that TV and film don't have their purposes. I think that they're some of the great loves of my life too, right? You know, as on the screen. But I think there's nothing quite like the active pursuit of imagining, you know, the world that the author has created for you, especially a story that like has a broad scope and has historical, you know, meaning and has, you know, an important message to tell, and that stays with you. I would say, you know, it's one of the most important sort of works that, you know, can stay with you for a whole lifetime. And so I guess that's the one thing I would want them to come away with loving. But the one thing I would want them to come away with knowing, I would say there are two things. Do I get two things?
Yeah, you can have two things. Yeah.
Okay, one for writing and one for literature, right? For writing, it would just be like how to follow a logical train of thought. Because actually, when I first started at the school where I teach now in New Jersey, I'll never forget my first major discussion with those kids, because they were 7th and 8th graders, and normally by 7th grade, I expect them to be able to you know, maintain probably about a 45-minute discussion easily, and then an hour and a half by the end of the year. But these kids could barely manage 10 minutes. I will never forget, right? Like 10 minutes in, they couldn't even understand. Like, I would ask them, I wish I could remember the questions that I would ask them. Like, I don't remember what it was, but they couldn't even logically deduce like what the next answer would be. And by the end of the year, it was, you know, easy for them. And so that's the sort of training that I like, that helps you deal with real world problems, right? Like in my own life, like, how do I deal with this thing, right? And it's the same sort of skill set that you get from learning how to write and learning how to think. And so that's what I would want them to come away with. And then for literature, I would want them to come away with being ruthlessly honest with themselves, because without that, none of the other moral lessons follow, because then you have a cognitive disconnect, you know? So.
Well, when you speak about literature, is there a separation between the classics and anything that's become a classic versus whatever's contemporary coming out now, or is all reading is reading?
I have two answers for that.
Okay.
I would say all reading is reading, because, you know, I have a student right now, actually, she's going into 7th grade, and she reads like really trashy not romance novels, but like, you know, pop culture novels, you know, that don't really have any great import. But from those novels, she has really gotten a great, you know, sense of how to write and how to think and how to, you know, articulate her ideas. She already is a bit verbal, but she definitely has learned a great amount of vocabulary and definitely a lot about style from these works. So, and also, you know what? When you're young, when you're in middle school, maybe you like really, you know, dumb things. Like, I read Twilight, okay? Like, I liked it at the time. I was in, you know, early high school. Don't hate me. But, you know, the whole point is that to love reading, that's so important. And then when you get older, then you're ready for kind of the harder works, which, you know, generally are the classics. And then because you love reading, it's not difficult to get into them. Do you know what I mean? But I definitely think that Twilight is not on the same level at all as A Tale of Two Cities, right? It's not like, well, they're both the same, it's great. Like, no, one actually means something, and one, you know, is an ephemeral sort of pop culture phenomenon. So,
well, it's been around for a long time, but otherwise, not as long as A Tale of Two Cities. It's been around a while. Yeah, well, that's a good point. Do you feel, maybe you might have sort of answered this already, but do you feel like you're competing with television and things like that when you're, hey guys, you need to read a book, and they're all like, I don't want to read a book.
Yeah. Well, but it's not, the problem is honestly not the kids, because they are not in full control of their lives. It's their parents. Their parents don't tell them. Like, I had an interesting experience where 2 years ago, I had a mom who was like, I really want my daughter to get better, you know, have more vocab, right? You know, have better vocab. How can she do this? And so we were saying certain things like, oh, she should study these words, right? And, you know, it's one thing to study a group of words for taking the SSATs. Like, you know, that's fine. But if you actually want to grow your vocab and grow it in terms of like contextualizing those words and seeing them and knowing them and, you know, being able to use them properly, then you got to read, right? So we were saying that. And one of the teachers at the school, you know, it was during a parent-teacher conference. He has now 5 kids. And he was saying, well, one of the things that my wife and I do is that we sit every night and we have like an hour where we read with or to our kids. So, we model it. And then she went, oh, no, I don't read. Okay, well, of course, how can you expect your kid to read if you're not going to read, right? And, how can you expect them to love it if it's not something that's modeled for them or shown to them or prioritized in your household? So, I think I don't feel like I compete when it comes to certain books at school because the kids are forced to read them.
Right. Yeah.
Right. But and they grow to love them because, I choose really good books if I may say so myself.
Right.
But it's like it's at home and it's like reading for pleasure that it's really hard to get them to recognize that as something that they could just do because it's not, something that their parents do.
Well, have you seen certain students who are readers and they do get that from their parents?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say...
Not absolute, yeah.
Yeah, it's not an absolute, right? There are some anomalies in either direction, but most of the time, if a kid is a reader, it's because either the parent is a reader too and, like, models it for the kid, or it's because the parent is clearly, like... maybe doesn't always model it, but is him or herself a reader. Do you know what I'm saying? Like I have this one kid who reads constantly and his mom is a lawyer. I don't know what his dad does. And so it's clear, like from, not only the things that she says or writes to me, but also just the way that she acts, I can tell that she herself is a well-read person. Right. And so she's obviously or at the very least, she's able to speak to her son, articulately and, educatedly about, I don't know if that's a word, whoops, about whatever it is that he's reading. And so, and she always is, and that's another thing, like she'll go to the library with him and take out books with him. Like there are parents who are confused, like, oh, libraries exist? Like, yes, you should take your child there. You should, have them browse the selection. But nowadays that's a long past, art form.
Right. The pastime. Yeah.
Yeah.
Just as a side question, just because you did mention film and stuff like that, do you watch adaptations? Do you show adaptations to your students?
I don't have a problem with adaptations. Like, I think that the adaptation of To Kill a Mockingbird is an excellent film. I'm trying to think of another adaptation that I've seen. I personally don't like a lot of adaptations and I actually don't show them with my the books that I teach because I actually like to show them something that's different so that they see the same moral or theme applied in a different context. So that's a purposeful kind of choice that I make. But I don't know. I have a real problem. I'm like such a purist that if the adaptation is different in any way from the feel of the book, then I hate it. And I don't like it. So.
Well, can you actually, going back, that's really interesting that you show something that's the same sort of, I guess, topic or something, but it's not the same. So what would be an example of that?
So let's see an example. Okay, with sixth graders the other year, I read The Miracle Worker. And the theme that we extracted from the book was actually kind of a modification of a Nietzsche quote, which was, you can survive any how so long as there's a why. And because we talked about, both Andy Sullivan and Helen Keller and how they both had struggles to overcome, but because they had this idea of why they were doing it, they were able to overcome their, each of their handicaps, in different ways. And so the film that I showed them was that Italian film, Life is Beautiful. Right. And it's actually a Nazi, World War II film, or like a concentration camp film. But the whole point was that they could see that the father was helping the son to overcome this terrible circumstance, in two different ways, right? One was like kind of by playing it off as a silly game, but also, right, by showing him the resilience and the perseverance and the power, whatever, all these different things. And so that was the why that got them through the how of their experience in the concentration camp. And so, yeah, that would be one example. I mean, obviously I have multiple ones, but.
You feel like they get it by the time that they're...
I would say most of the time, almost all of the kids get it. There are some times where I think maybe the theme is a little too abstract, I've only had one film that I haven't had perfect luck with, and that is for the play Cyrano de Bergerac, which is one of my favorite plays to teach. And we talk about having confidence but okay, so the theme that we extract there is about confidence and about recognizing, not letting other people, not being insecure and letting other people determine for you what your life should be. And So that's like the main theme that we extract from the play. But it wasn't until a few years ago that I found a movie that I thought really captured a lot of the other ideas that were present in Cyrano, and that a lot of that has to do with compromising, right? Like how much should you compromise? How much should you be intellectually or ethically pure, I guess? Is it okay to compromise on your principles in this case or in that case? And so I thought the film La La Land did a really good job, actually, of demonstrating how much you can have when you compromise or when you don't compromise, etc. And in both of the, like, there's even this other thing, there's this whole symbolism with this white scarf in Cyrano, and there even is like an abstract corollary in the film. But I've had a couple kids really get the connection, but a lot of kids just don't get it. I think it's too abstruse for them.
Oh, that's interesting.
But I can't find another film that really fits Cyrano, so if you know of one, that would be great. We should talk about it.
Yeah, please let me know. Well, it's actually what you were just speaking of with oh man, the example you gave right before this, that sounds,
Miracle Worker?
Oh yeah, The Miracle Worker. So that sounds a lot like Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. That sounds very much, well, that's just another book, but it sounds very much, right, you could survive on almost any how as long as you have the why. That's right, that's what got him through the Holocaust.
Yeah.
Do you have to teach about the Holocaust when you're doing that? Or how much do you have to tell them about it when you're doing that?
Well, that's a good question. I think that's an important part of studying any work of art. Well, I actually have two minds of this. I think that every work of art should be enjoyed in and of itself, but if you want to understand it even more deeply, I think it's important to know about the historical context, or what else is going on in the author's life or in the life of the characters. So if I were to teach, like Anne Frank's diary or something about the Holocaust, like if I were to do a whole cinema unit that revolved around movies like Life is Beautiful, I would definitely teach them about that. I think they learn about that in history class, though, so I'm not too worried about there. Generally, they know, like, we know 1940s, World War II, blah, blah, blah. Some of the kids, like, even though they learned about it, didn't know, so whatever, we get to do a quick review. But right. Also, seeing it portrayed in film can also solidify it for them sometimes.
Right. Well, I gotta say, the best thing, when I was in high school, the best decision that was made from the curriculum standpoint was when the AP European History and AP Art History, when they spoke to each other and they designed their curriculums around each other, that you get it because you're getting history from two different very important perspectives. That was,
But I think it's good, like what you're saying is that was in high school, and I think that's much more of a high school kind of, especially late high school task.
Yeah.
To kind of become more interdisciplinary and realize that all of your subjects overlap, right? Or like shed meaning on each other. And I think in middle school, for some of the kids it's possible, for a lot of the kids it's not possible. So, and that's just where they're at. And for me, that's why, like when you asked earlier, what do you want them to come away with? Well, I would rather they come away with a love of reading, because they'll get that later, right? Then instead of like contextualizing everything and like letting them know every single detail about like the 1930s in Alabama, right, for To Kill a Mockingbird or whatever. Like they don't need all that information right now. They need to know the basics so that they can understand the context, so that they can understand why Atticus is doing something or why Jem is doing something, right? So.
Right. Just a quick question on this, and then we're going to shift the conversation a little bit. Do you feel either that you're competing with, or that do you see some sort of effect from social media in middle grade? I remember, I'll give an example, like when texting first came out and everyone for like 4 minutes decided that it was going to be so good for everybody on a literary level because, look, everyone's writing now. And then they realized that everyone was writing great as GR8, so it's not helping on a literary level. Well, over the last, if you've been teaching the last 10 years, there's been a big move in social media over the last 10 years. Like it's really blown up and taken over so much of the outside conversation. Are you seeing that affect middle grader anyway? Or do you think most of them are kind of, they haven't yet entered that world and been affected by the GR8 world yet?
Well, I can tell you what I've seen. I don't know if I'm the right person to say definitively if it is because of social media, but I can tell you, I've honestly seen a really sad slide down, both in terms of the quality of what kids are used to, I guess, over the past 10 years, as well as what the parents are expecting and what they look for. I don't know if it's my shift from California to the East Coast. I don't know if it's there are other factors as well, but all I can tell you is when I first started, I could have sworn the kids were writing like, Shakespeare basically. And, now it just feels like, there are some kids who write really well, but to get them to write a basic 5-paragraph essay, it's like they have no conception of, like I'll go over the same thing, from 6th grade through 7th grade through 8th grade. I just build and make it harder every year. We do the same thing. Like, what's a thesis statement? How is it difficult to remember this? Anyway, and it's like they've already forgotten. I don't know if that has to do with attention spans, right, which has to do with social media. I don't know if it has to do with the fact that they don't really text each other like complete thoughts, right? That's
Right.
another pet peeve of mine. I don't know about you and your friends, but when I text people, I write out full sentences and I write it like it's a letter, right? Like it's an email almost.
Yep.
And they don't do that. They'll send a string of texts, right, one after the other, short little bursts, and they're not even full thoughts, and none of it's spelled correctly, and no punctuation or capitalization is necessary. And one thing that I've seen degrade is the contraction with, like, they'll say could have, and they don't realize it's could apostrophe VE. They think it's OF.
Right.
And like, so there are things like that. And obviously, even in like formal essays, and again, a lot of times it's 6th graders, so they're just puppies. So you just sort of corral them and, hope for the best. But,
Right.
but even in 7th grade, I'll see like the letter U. I'm like, you've got to be kidding me. In a formal essay, you're writing the letter U
Right.
as the word U. That's crazy. So I don't know if it's due to social media, but I can tell you that I've seen a lot of mistakes like that recently.
Wow.
Oh yeah. Super inspiring.
Yeah. So now just to shift a little bit, I had spoken to you about this a while ago, and then only now, when we actually planned to do this bonus episode, did I finally get around to getting the book and reading it. I want to talk about Shane because I know it's a favorite of yours.
Yay!
So it's Shane by Jack Schaefer, and this is I won't say an old book, but it's nearing its century mark soon. We got another couple of years first, but it's closing on a year. So I had seen the film from it a while ago, especially because it's a classic, so you got to see the classic films. And I remember there are certain. I know you haven't seen it yet, or won't ever see it. Yeah,
ever watch it.
Well, I want to reassure you that even though I don't remember the film exactly, there were certain scenes that had such subtlety in them that you don't feel like storytellers use that anymore, and in a very admirable way that they have it. They definitely got a lot of things right in the film, so let's talk about the book a little bit. So why is Shane a book that you return to year after year?
Okay, so first of all, I just want to preface this by saying I actually hate Westerns. I really don't like them. I don't like the genre. I don't like the setting or anything. But this book, as you've mentioned, I teach it every year. It is one of my favorite books to teach. And there are and so, like, in other words, it's so good that even a hater of Westerns, will teach it, right?
Right.
And there are two major reasons. One has to do with the skill that it actually teaches the kids, and one has to do with the theme. So the skill that it's teaching the kids is everything is under the surface. Everything is metaphorical. And so, like, for instance, Shane has a past, and he's very hurt deeply by it. And yet it's never going to actually tell you that Shane is hurt deeply. All it tells you, it'll say something like his mouth was a bitter line, like a gash in his face, right? Like,
right.
It doesn't tell you why his face or his eyes will twinkle at certain moments, and you have to infer why his eyes are twinkling here, or why he's sorrowful after he's beat up this one kid, and then he scoops him up gently and wipes his forehead. Why would he do that? None of it is told explicitly to you. It's all hinted at. It's all expressed in this very metaphorical and beautiful, like, visceral language. And so those are really challenging skills, and a lot of times a lot of kids who are very kind of straightforward or matter of fact, that's a really a big challenge for them. And so I really like stretching their minds that way. But the other reason I love teaching this book is because it introduces to the kids, usually it's the first time they've ever really thought about this or experienced it, or not experienced it, but like thought about it for sure. It introduces to them this sense of objective morality. So, for instance, like, when kids do the wrong thing, right, when they misbehave in class, I never say something to them like, I'm mad at you, or you did this to me, or whatever, right? Because if I were to say that, then I'm setting them up as having done me wrong. But they didn't do anything wrong to me. The point is that they did something wrong because there's an objective rule that says this is wrong. And Shane really introduces that topic to the kids. Like, there's this sense of, oh, there's rightness, and you either are doing the right thing, like no matter if someone sees you or not, right? Shane knows. And so, like, after I teach the book, it's something I can draw back on, and we talk about the right versus the easy thing. It's just so applicable to their lives as middle schoolers, and recognizing, that even if their parents don't find out, or their teachers don't find out, or their friends don't find out, Shane still knows, right? And that he's disappointed in them. So I love teaching it for that reason too.
Well, that's actually an interesting thing, because objective morality, or the kind of morality that, maybe morality is not the right word for it, but the kind of
like principles,
I guess, that ruled the West are not principles that we necessarily agree with today. Not all of them. The general ideas, I think, yes, but the fact that you could just have a gunfight and it's self-defense and that's it. Okay, I don't want to get it. It's, Second Amendment thing, but as a general idea, most of us are not walking around with guns and walking into a saloon, and if someone calls you a liar, you shoot them. Yeah.
I'm just kidding.
No, but I think most of us do agree, however you feel about that, I think most of us agree that if someone calls you a liar, that's not a reason to shoot them.
Right. No. Well, there's more to that. Because that whole thing with Ernie, right? I know you're talking about. It's more than just being called a liar. But no, that's actually the point that I also like to bring up about Shane. You're reminding me, because I always start off a book with what I call a motivation activity, where it's before the kids know what the book is about or know what the book is, and it introduces them to like an idea or a theme that's going to be present in the book, and that they're going to that we're going to come back to later or discuss more later. And for Shane, the one that we do is we talk about this concept of law and order, right? Like the law is basically a term for the police, and order is basically a term for the courts, the justice system, right?
Right.
And so we always start off by saying, like, what if there were no courts? Let's just take those away for a second. Like, think about how much money we could save. And and the kids immediately are like, well, wait, like, what about this problem? What about this? And I say, you know what? You guys make some really good arguments, but I'm actually thinking, why are we even having the police right now? It's like, this is a topical point, actually.
Yeah.
Didn't think it would be, but and then they get really upset. They're like, wait, but then it would just be, and then they conclude for themselves, and we actually do this whole like little activity that concludes for them that it would just be vigilante justice, and that the only way to solve any dispute when you're dealing with an unreasonable person is to kill them. Like, there's no other solution. And so I also love teaching Shane to kind of reinforce the point that this is what we have, like, in terms of what Hobbes talks about, right? In terms of like the social compact, right? Like the only way to not to have a life that is, nasty, brutish, and short, is to make sure that we have like these laws that we can all agree on, so that we can have adjudicators of those laws, and then we can all just be safe, but also like not have other people annoy us. You know what I mean?
Right. And you feel like they get also the language in Shane. It's not written as like, I don't want to call it old-timey as you'd expect. Like, most of the English, there's no these and thous in it. But do you feel like they get it when they're reading it?
Oh, yeah. The only words that they had trouble with, there were some words, like, they understood that yellow meant scared.
Right.
And they understood that, they liked, like, hollering, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
An apostrophe. Like, they get that. There was one word they asked me about. What was it? I think it was, like, the flannel cakes. They were like, what does this mean? I was like, it's pancakes.
Yeah.
That's all it is, right? Yeah.
Right.
They're like, it was made of wool? Like, I don't understand. No. Yeah.
I guess, do you have any favorite scene from the book?
Oh, my God.
Okay, so many. Can you choose one of your most favorite scenes?
Okay. So I have a favorite scene, but I have a favorite part.
Okay.
My favorite scene has got to be... Oh, yeah. Oh, my God. I can't believe I even had to think about this, because I reference this scene all the time. It's the scene, it's actually kind of a throwaway scene that you would think it would be. It's where there are these two men, so just like super quick, one sentence synopsis of the premise of the book, one sentence premise of the book is... because of the Homestead Act, people are coming out to the West, but then the guy who's already there, named Fletcher, is mad that they're encroaching upon his land, right?
Right.
And he has these two guys. Fletcher sends these two guys, Chris and this other guy, to go beat up Shane in the saloon. And Shane is, by the way, also a newcomer to the Valley, right? He rode in summer of 1889. And so they're walking past the saloon, or moseying up to the saloon, and then they look in, and not Chris, but what's the man, we call him the sallow face man, because that's the way he's described in the book.
Yeah.
He looks in and he does this double take, and all of a sudden he realizes, and he's like, oh, I'm not going in there, right?
Right.
And he says to Chris, I'm leaving. And Chris is like, what do you know this guy? And he's like, I didn't say that, right? I ain't never said that, but
Right.
all I'm telling you is I'm leaving. I'm getting the hell out of this valley. And Chris is like, oh, I thought you were just Yella, right? I knew you were Yella.
Right.
And he's like, okay, you can say what you want to, but peace, basically.
Yeah.
And he leaves, right? And the whole point is, I talk to my students about this and say, what type of person, if you were just sitting in this classroom, we have like a window in the door to the classroom, I say that if you all of a sudden just looked and saw that this person was looking at you from this window, that would make you not leave, not be afraid, but actually go home, pack up as much as you could carry, and get out of New Jersey. Like, what would make you leave your home?
Right.
And so the way that they describe this person is someone who's coming after you, someone who's threatening, someone who wants to they put it as wants to kill you, but that's actually, like, it's one of the best ways to understand who Shane is, because Shane is this. He's not just the sense of law and order. He's this symbolism, or the symbol, of rightness, of morality. And so that's why, like, Shane knows whether you did the right thing or not, because the man knows, the sallow-faced man knows, if he goes into the bar and he tries to beat Shane up, he's lost it before he started that fight, right? Like, there's no one who can fight and be better than Shane. And so that scene is really complex, but it's one that is just a very powerful one, but also one that I love to teach to my students. But the best part is the last chapter. It's just one page, and it has these beautiful moments where it's Bob, the little boy who's the narrator of the whole book. He's just recollecting. He's recalling all of these different things. Like he says things like, I think of Shane in all of the times that he was revealed to me. Like, we don't say things like that about people, right? We say things like that about ideas.
Right.
And that's because Shane is both a man and an idea.
Right.
And it's just this beautiful language and this beautiful eloquence about, I don't want to ruin anything, but like certain things that Shane does, and it's just such a powerful ending to a book. So
Right.
I always get kids who cry with me, so that's good. Yeah.
Well, it's also because he talks about how his dad, like Shane and his dad, like they're on the, I would say they're on the same level, but they kind of are. The way in his eyes, it's like the only one who could equal his dad is Shane, and the dad will even say that Shane is even like more than he is.
Yeah.
But
yeah, the way I explain that to the kids is, imagine that there's, like for girls, it would be, imagine that there is the man of your dreams, and he's beautiful and he's intelligent, he's funny and he loves you and all these different things, right?
Right.
And, so I put up a picture of whatever celebrity they like at the time, right?
Right.
Okay, great. And then I say, okay, now imagine, and for the boys, I'm like, yeah, for the girls, I say, do you want to date him? And they say yes, or do you want to marry him? And then for the boys, it's like, do you want to be like him? And they're like, yeah, absolutely, right? Like, all the girls will love me. Okay, great. And then I say, okay, now I'm going to tell you about a second person. And this person is just as handsome and actually, although Shane is said to be like smaller and less muscular than Bob's dad, but
right.
Still, he's just as handsome and he's just as intelligent. He's just all these different things, but he's a superhero, right? And the girls are like, oh my God, right? And then the boys are, and the whole point is that you want that Shane is, Joe, of course, is a great man, but Shane is more than a man, right? Like he has these like almost supernatural powers, and that's kind of like the way to understand the difference between the two. It's not that Joe is bad or Joe is flawed. It's just that Joe is not a superhero.
Right.
So.
Well, is that I hope this isn't a spoiler, because the way it sounds, you kind of know that Shane leaves at the end. Is he leaving because, okay, I've done what I got to do, or is there something else is there another reason for him that he has to leave?
Okay, so there are two reasons. One is that he has done what he needs to do. He's made the valley, well, what it needs to be. I'll just put it that somewhat ambiguous way.
Yeah.
So that he can do the same for other valleys, right?
Right.
But the other reason is that the symbolism comes in the way that he dresses himself. So when he rides in, he's wearing all black.
Right.
And but he changes pretty quickly once he decides to stay on and be with Joe and help him and be a rancher.
Right.
He changes into jeans and flannels and whatever else it is. But then when he goes to on that magical night to Grafton Saloon to face the people he needs to face, he dresses himself again in black, and he even makes this comment. I think it's to Bob. I can't remember. And he says, I tried. a man is what he is, Bob, and there's no break in the mold, right? I tried that and I failed, and that's the whole point. That's one of the major themes that we talk about, actually, in terms of the book, is that, you know, if you think of yourself as a bad person, then there's no, like, you're right, you can't break that mold, right? But if you realize the good that you do, right, if you realize that, you know, there are all of these good aspects, and those are the things that you should channel, and those are the things that you should focus on, then, you know, you wouldn't dress yourself in black that way. And there's also symbolism in the colors of his gun, and the color where his finger would be is ivory, and all these other things. Anyway, but he dresses himself as black, and he doesn't like that part of himself. So that's another reason why he has to leave.
So that's almost one thing that Shane doesn't have right, in that he tries to find himself, and he realizes that he almost, you know, he fails, or he sees that he can't do this anymore, and he leaves, and that goes against us saying, no, you got to keep, you know, fighting, and you got to make that happen. I was going to say, before we're going to wrap up here, I don't know if it's my favorite thing, but one thing that was very notable to me, especially because I don't think we do this today, and this is actually something that is notable again in the film, you get the sense that Bob's mom, the mother, is starting to regard Shane in a certain kind of way. It doesn't explicitly say that there's any sort of romantic anything there, but you kind of, I think, get that there might be, you know, some sort of feelings developing between them, and then nothing happens from it. As far as, like, they realize, like, he even says something like, I can't, like, you are your family, I can't remove you from your family, and then still have respect for myself. And that is something, that is one of the most subtle scenes in film, when you see that in the I was telling you about in the film part of it, there's one point where Shane kind of realizes that, like, okay, maybe, you know, these feelings, whatever, and he walks away from it, and then she goes to her husband and tells the husband, like, oh, hold me, whatever, but we know it's not him she wants in that moment. But again, she doesn't cross the line. Neither of them cross the line. And I feel like I don't even say feel like, I know that in film today and in literature today, like, oh, if they're feeling something, they have to act on it, even if it is immoral, because your feelings are more moral than, I guess, objective morality at this point. And it is something that struck me, only because we don't do that anymore.
I know.
So I guess it's just another element of why that's a good element of the book. So there you go.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And, you know, it's funny. There was another book that really stuck with me in the same way that Shane did, that has the same sort of element of restraint, and that is Ethan Frome. I don't know if you've ever read that book, but it starts off really slowly, like Shane does, and you're like, what's happening? Like in Shane, for like 14 chapters, they're cutting down a stump. Like, what even is this, right? But I always tell the kids, right, actually, if you go back and reread that part, that metaphorically explains everything that's about to happen for the rest of the book. And so there is a purpose in all that. And Ethan Frome, there is purpose in a lot of the earlier parts too. But actually, it's been a while since I've read Ethan Frome, and I don't teach it, so do pardon me if I recall this wrong. But one of the main guys, he's married, but then his wife has this ailment and illness, and he falls in love with someone else. But like, there's so much tension and so much, you know, passion, but it you know, built and built and built, but nothing ever comes of it. And I think that in a sad way, it is kind of reflective of the change in our morality as a time. Right, nowadays, it's just expected. I mean, how many marriages end in divorce? How many marriages have like adulterous affairs that go on, right? And, you know, it's really sad to hear that. And I would wish that more in fact, even in Cyrano, right, the whole time, Cyrano keeps faithful, all of the characters faithful, and that was written in the 19th century about the 17th century. You know, all of these books that I try to teach are ones, unless it's a cautionary tale, they're like Dorian Gray, which is one of my other favorite books to teach. I try to make sure that they're ones that demonstrate people making logical and good choices, as opposed to, you know, just impulsive or, you know, capricious choices.
Right.
So.
Oh, very good. Okay. Well, not because I want to cut the conversation, but because we do got to wrap up. So, as I ask everyone, if you could fill in the blank of, I love when writers or publishers or whatever it's going to be do X, and I can't stand it when they do X. How would you fill in those blanks?
I would say, I love when, oh crap.
Well, language.
What was I going to say? I was going to say, I love when writers... Oh, okay. Well, I love when authors delve into the psyche of a character, right, and really explore what the character is thinking. If it, like, I don't even need a lot of action to happen in the novel.
Right.
I like it more. I mean, that's great and everything, but I like it more when they're explaining what a character is feeling, or explaining why, right? And I just read a bunch of Ishiguro novels. He's a British author, believe it or not, who is just, he does a good job of this.
Right.
Tom Wolfe does a really good job of this. I'm trying to think, man, I'm forgetting every other person, but George Orwell in 1984 does a good job of this. But basically, when they delve into what is the character, how is the character coming to his own conclusions and going through and figuring out the decisions for himself. And I hate when authors, when they just don't do enough of that, right? When it's all action, when it's all plot, and when it's just very superficial, that to me is not a compelling story. I don't care if they're explosions or, marriages or whatever else. When Jane Austen is delving into Emma's mind after she's been embarrassed in front of Mr. Knightley, and she's coming to the conclusion that the reason she's upset is because she's in love with him, that is one of the most powerful parts of any book I've ever read. And if it's just then Emma decided she was in love, that would be so boring, right? Who wants to read that? So I really, really love it when characters are really their thoughts and their ideas are coming to the forefront of a story.
Great. Very good. Well, thanks so much, Naomi, for joining us.
And thank you, Esterleia.
It was a pleasure to have you on.
Thank you.
And cheers to everyone. And look up Oh My Word wherever you listen to podcasts. Or you can check it out on my website at eltenenbaum, TENENBAUM.com, and see what else we got going there.